Imagine living in a world where defying authority could cost you not just your freedom, but also expose you to punishments so horrific they seem straight out of a nightmare. Welcome to the brutal reality of the British Empire's justice system, an era where the law was enforced with ruthless creativity and shocking efficiency. In this video, we will dive deep into the most gruesome and unimaginable methods of punishment used by the British Empire. These practices were not only a means of control but also a tool of cruelty. The merciless legal code of the British Empire at the heart of these draconian punishments lay a strict legal framework known as the Bloody Code. During the 17th and early 19th centuries, this legal system included over 200 offenses, punishable by death. Even minor crimes like stealing bread or committing petty theft could result in execution. The infamous nine-tailed cat or nine tails stands out as one of the most notorious tools of corporal punishment used in the British Empire, especially in the navy and penal colonies. This whip, consisting of 9 knotted cords, was designed to inflict the maximum amount of pain while ensuring the victim survived to endure the punishment. Sailors accused of insubordination or convicts in penal colonies like Australia were frequently subjected to the cat o' nine tails, a symbol of not just discipline, but the Empire's absolute authority. The punishment itself was often a public spectacle performed in front of the punished person. This appears to serve as a warning. Each lash would tear through the skin, leaving deep and agonizing wounds. Those who survived carried the scars for life as a physical reminder of their submission to imperial rule. The British Navy, famous for its strict discipline, recorded cases where flogging sessions extended to dozens or even hundreds of lashes. On many occasions, doctors were present to ensure the victim did not die too soon, allowing the punishment to continue. Historical accounts from penal colonies reveal that the cat o' nine tails was used with extreme severity. Those sentenced to flogging were tied to a frame to prevent movement, ensuring the punishment was carried out exactly as planned. Public executions were a central feature of the British Empire's justice system, serving both as a method of execution and a grim form of public spectacle. Known as justice, in full view of all these events attracted crowds, numbering in the thousands, turning the punishment of criminals into a morbid form of entertainment. Convicts convicted of crimes ranging from theft to murder were executed in marketplaces, town squares, or near the places where their crimes were allegedly committed, ensuring the maximum impact on the local community. The process itself was prolonged to enhance its deterrent effect. The condemned would be paraded through the streets, often in shackles, before being led to the gallows. A clergyman would administer the last rites, and the executioner would loudly proclaim the accused's crimes to remind the onlookers that justice was being served. However, the death by hanging was not always instant till the introduction of the long drop method in the 19th century, designed to break the neck quickly. Victims often suffered a prolonged and agonizing death by strangulation. The spectacle of the hanging was meant to reinforce social order, but it often had the opposite effect, as contemporary observers like Charles Dickens pointed out. These events dehumanized both the condemned and the onlookers, fostering an atmosphere of cruelty instead of respect for the law. In some cases, public hangings backfired, turning criminals into legendary figures. This was especially true in the case of characters like Jack Shepherd, whose daring escapes in defiance of authority captivated the public's imagination even when he met his end at the gallows. By the late 19th century, public executions were abolished in Britain, moving into the confines of prisons as part of broader reforms to the justice system. The firing squad was a method used in the British Empire primarily for soldiers convicted of desertion, mutiny, or cowardice. It represented a grim combination of discipline and public humiliation, intended to deter others from committing similar transgressions. Unlike other forms of execution, this one took place in military settings, reinforcing the rigid hierarchy and loyalty expected within the armed forces. The process was meticulous. The condemned would often be blindfolded and tied to a post or seated in a chair, while a line of soldiers aimed their rifles. To ease the guilt of the executioners, one of the weapons would be loaded with a blank round, ensuring no soldier knew for certain who had fired the fatal shot. Notable cases of firing squad executions occurred during wartime, particularly in World War I. Records show that hundreds of British soldiers faced this fate, accused of desertion or disobedience under the immense pressures of trench warfare. Critics argue that many of these men were suffering from undiagnosed psychological conditions now recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. Yet despite these controversies, the British Army justified the practice as a necessary measure to maintain discipline in the chaos of war. The carriage daughter, though not as widely used as other methods of punishment in the British Empire, the carriage daughter was a notorious torture device associated with the Tower of London. Known for its terrifying ability to inflict pain through compression, it was named after its creator, Leonard Kevington, a lieutenant of the Tower during Henry VIII's reign. The device was designed to crush the body into an unbearable contorted position. The victim would be forced to kneel, their head, hands, and legs tightly bound by an iron frame as the mechanism tightened, compressing the body inward, causing extreme pain and often severe internal injuries. Used mainly on political prisoners and those accused of treason, the carriage daughter was the opposite of the torture wheel, which stretched the body, Whereas the wheel dislocated joints, the carriage daughter crushed them, breaking bones and causing severe internal bleeding. What made this device especially terrifying was its psychological impact. Unlike other public punishments, the carriage daughter was often used in private, adding a layer of isolation to the victim's suffering. This secrecy heightened its effect, as prisoners not only feared the physical pain but the uncertainty of their fate. Accounts from survivors are scarce, likely due to the severity of the injuries inflicted. And quartering was one of the most brutal punishments in British history, reserved for those convicted of high treason. Its purpose was to send a strong message of deterrence, carried out publicly to emphasize the consequences of defying the crown. The process began with the condemned being tied to a horse and dragged through the streets to the site of execution, a humiliating spectacle designed to degrade the accused before the crowd. At the execution site, the person was hanged, but not to the point of death, ensuring they remained conscious before being The body was then divided into 4 parts, and the remains were often displayed in prominent locations like city gates as a grim warning to others. Though this punishment was used from the 10th century and reached its peak during the Tudor period, public opinion began to shift by the late 17th century, and it was seen increasingly as barbaric, leading to its abolition in 1870. Transportation to the colonies was one of the most significant forms of punishment in the British Empire, extensively used between the 17th and 19th centuries. Instead of executing or imprisoning criminals, authorities chose to send them to remote territories like Australia, America before the American Revolution, and later Bermuda and Tasmania. This punishment served a dual purpose, ridding Britain of unwanted criminal populations, while also providing labor for the colonies. The journey itself was often a form of punishment. Convicts were crammed onto overcrowded ships for months, enduring appalling conditions including disease, malnutrition, and abuse. Records show that mortality rates on these journeys were high, with some ships losing a quarter or more of their passengers before reaching their destination. Once in the colonies, life rarely improved for the convicts. They were auctioned off or assigned to work on farms, infrastructure projects, or as domestic servants, often enduring harsh treatment and grueling labor. These practices were met with growing criticism from reformers in Britain, who argued that the system was inhumane and failed to rehabilitate criminals. By the mid-19th century, opposition combined with changing dynamics in the British Empire led to the decline of transportation as a form of punishment. Death by pressing was one of the most brutal forms of punishment used in the British legal system during the medieval and early modern periods. This method was applied to those who refused to plead guilty in court. Punishment consisted of laying the accused down on their back, placing a wooden board over their body, and gradually adding stones or heavy weights. The increasing pressure caused unbearable pain, crushing the chest and often leading to a slow and agonizing death. If the person did not confess, the deliberate cruelty of this method was intended to force submission, but some preferred to endure the torment rather than confess. One of the most notorious cases was that Margaret Clitheroe in 1586, a devout Catholic from York, England, who refused to confess when accused of harboring Catholic priests during Queen Elizabeth I's Protestant reign. Her defiance led to her being subjected to pressing with heavy stones on her body until she died after about 15 minutes. Her strength and bravery later led to her canonization as a Catholic saint in 1970. Although this punishment was relatively rare, it symbolized the extremes of medieval justice. And over time, the death by pressing became less common as attitudes towards such brutal punishments shifted, and it was officially abolished in 1772. The punishments of the British Empire serve as a shocking reminder of how far societies have come and how far they went in the name of law and order. These practices, while terrifying, reflect the iron control of power and the brutal consequences of disobedience. But they also raise a question: what would you have done in their place? Could you have endured the lashes of the cat o' nine tails or the crushing weight of the pianoforte et due? Tell us in the comments which method you found most shocking. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more deep dives into the darkest corners of history. After all, history not only teaches us about the past but also about the resilience of the human spirit. Let us keep exploring.